So we're going to have a new Secretary of Energy soon. How do you feel about that? Do you think we're going to be on the brink of a new arms race, or do you have hope for renewed interest in reduction? And maybe I'll ask Dr. Perry to answer that first.
I think we're in for a new arms race. It's already started, really. I don't think there's anything to do with the Secretary of Energy, because while he's responsible for building them, he just does what he's told in that respect. But yes, I think we're in for a new nuclear arms race, and I think we're in the early stages of it right now.
I just want to add about the Secretary of Energy. I think that if anyone wants to know the state of our nuclear weapons complex, they should watch Rick Perry's appearance on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's unbelievable. It's really incredible. He has a degree in animal sciences, and he is now responsible for 2/3 of the nuclear weapons in our arsenal.
No relation, Dr. Perry? All right, I grew up, this is spoiler alert on my age. Okay, we're in the age of alternate facts, I'm really 30. But I happened to grow up just coincidentally with a fallout shelter in my basement. My dad built it, and we used to go down there and play Barbies. But it did save us during a tornado, I must say. So I grew up with the duck and cover, like Howard was mentioning, and the Russians are coming, and that sort of thing. Is there a new story we should be telling? I know this is all really scary, and Erica, when you spoke, you talked about including innovation and sort of positive thinking around this issue. But do any of you have thoughts on sort of something different than duck and cover, or the Russians are coming? Or maybe the Russians are still coming, I don't know.
I'll start off by saying that I think we're in a world now where Americans just think that this whole threat has gone away. The end of the Cold War, it's out of vogue. Whew, we don't have to worry about that anymore. And in fact, as we've heard all evening, the threat is more dire than ever. In my house, I've got a couple of teenagers. Despite what I do, they really have very little idea of the history. I mean, we live 45 minutes from Los Alamos. It's not included typically in school curriculums. There is just a very little understanding, and I get it. It's really intimidating. You go, well, what can I do? I'm just like one individual. It's not like climate change where you feel, well, you can recycle and put in better light bulbs and stuff. What are you supposed to do? Where do you begin? How do you feel that anything you can do can make a difference? And that will be the challenge, and what N Square is trying to bring in a younger generation of people and make you feel like, oh, here's what I can do. Because otherwise it's just scary.
I would say that you can focus on the fear, you can focus on the details that are threatening, but I think most powerfully there are the human stories. And I certainly found in my research incredible heroism by unsung heroes who helped to avert this threat. And the gentleman again to my right, I mean, there are people who have taken bold public stances, there are people who are willing to speak out, and the fact remains that a nuclear weapon has not destroyed a city since Nagasaki in 1945. Some of that is luck, but some of that is because of the hard work and the personal courage and the risks that were taken to prevent it. So that might be a way to tell the story in a way that conveys that we are at risk, but that people sometimes are willing to stick their neck out or even lose their lives in order to protect other people. And again, I come back to, I loved Strangelove and Failsafe and those old films about the nuclear threat, but they tended to demonize the military, and they tended to be very simplistic in their depiction of those in the Defense Department. And the reality is far more complex, And there really are public servants who are devoting their lives to trying to prevent this.
One last question. The Russian hacking. I think, I was going to ask you, do you really think it's real? But I guess it's kind of been proven that first it has in some ways. But can you talk a little bit about that? About what do we do about that? Are we hacking them? You know, I mean, is it a mutual thing?
So first on the Russian hacking, you know, there are still lots of people who think, you know, maybe it's not the Russians. Just from a professional point of view, you know, when we analyze cyber attacks, we can never tell you specifically it was Joe Smith sitting behind the desk, you know, doing this thing. Even if we get indicators in the attacks where the guy leaves his name, maybe someone else did it and put the guy's name in there, right? So you have no way of really knowing. But the group that was behind the DNC attacks and taking John Podesta's emails had been in operation for 7 years. Right, so it's not that singular attack. If you look at that singular attack, sure, you could look at it and say, well, maybe it's not the Russians, you know, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. We have 7 years of evidence, multiple campaigns on the Ukraine, the Baltic states, embassies all over the world, you know, governments, from the same actor group. And so it's really, you know, it's a bit, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, models like a duck, must be a duck. Okay, so in that sense, you know, it's likely the case. What can we do about it, and is the US government doing the same thing? Yeah, you know, I mean, independent even cyber attacks, you know, I mean, there's documented history where the US has tried to influence elections. So, you know, I don't necessarily think as US citizens we can be that outraged to say, wow, this is happening. It's not the first time this has happened, and it's not the Russians who were probably the first to do something like this. Can we protect ourselves? You know, what's really interesting, again, it goes back, it's very similar. You look at the DNC, the DNC is not a governmental organization, right? John Podesta doesn't have the US government behind him protecting his email account. The election system, in order for them to basically do sanctions on the Russians, you might have seen they did sanctions, they named the head of the GRU, which is kind of the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe the CIA in the US. It's not a one-to-one sort of comparison. They actually had to add the election groups and the election system as critical infrastructure in order to apply sanctions. Otherwise, they didn't have legal ability to do so because, you know, the DNC is not part of the US government. A very similar thing happened with Sony. You might laugh at this, but when North Korea wiped out Sony's network, in order for the US to, again, out North Korea and say North Korea did this and take retaliatory action, they actually had to add the media industry as critical infrastructure to the US. So you might not know, but the media industry is actually now part of critical infrastructure. So, you know, there's these aspects that are very difficult to protect against because, again, we're talking about private organizations versus government entities.
Okay, I know everybody's itching to talk to you guys one-on-one, but I'm going to ask you each down the row and just a sentence or two, what keeps you up at night? Let's start down there with David.
This panel tonight, to start. Yeah, it's you know, just as a writer, it all starts with, you know, paranoid apocalyptic fantasies, and
You got a bunch of them tonight.
Yeah, so yeah, that very scenario. Oh, one sentence: paranoid apocalyptic fantasy.
Same thing. You know, because our show is a political show, you talked about this, I wish I could have a news blackout because I think that's what would, you know, let me sleep some. But I have to watch this all day, every day, and write about it and think about it all day, every day. So I would say reality and my job.
I think for my money, it's Pakistan because their command and control structure is deeply flawed and compromised. The government is deeply infiltrated by forces that are antithetical to the West. And it's a country that I think is always on the verge of implosion.
I think the biggest danger might be the United States. The dangers of Russia attacking the United States or the United States attacking, those are not the dangers. The dangers are we wandered into a war of some kind. And our long-term warning system is the easiest way I can think of to start a nuclear war. In fact, it's not the only way I can think of that the nuclear war will really start. So what we can do is fix that system, or to get away from the policies, and get away from our ICBMs, get away from the things that are causing the problem. This is a very low probability of happening, 1 in 100,000 or something. Can't put a number to it really, but it's not zero. And
We have had 3 false alarms that I know of. Russia's had 3 that I know of. Luckily, none of them have ever resulted in a launch. But we should not be depending on luck for something that really would end our civilization.
I'm not apocalyptic, but I'm really deeply concerned. And I think the thing that worries me most is that this is the greatest threat we face. We can greatly reduce the threat, but we're really not talking about it. And in the absence of a public dialogue, decisions are made in secret. Decisions are made by people who may not really be competent to make them. And I'm not going to mention anyone specifically. But I remember when I was in college and Ronald Reagan was president, every single person in this country thought about this threat, debated it, and we had some of the largest political rallies in American history, which had a real impact in ending the Cold War without a nuclear war. And when I was a kid, the notion that the Soviet Union would vanish from the earth and the Berlin Wall would come down without a world war, without millions of people dying, was inconceivable. So I really do believe that change can happen for the better. And this risk is never going to be zero, but it can be greatly reduced. But what concerns me is the lack of awareness, mainly among people under the age of 30, 35. Half the population of the United States was not yet born or were small children when the Cold War ended. So the greatest threat for me, in my view, is the lack of discussion.
When people ask me this question, I think they're surprised to hear that I sleep quite fine at night. I don't know. For me, the thing is that I often at events like this as well, I find that people always come away afraid and just like wow, and just are scared and afraid, and that's like the last reaction I want people to have. Very similar to Eric's thing. I think the most important thing is not to come away afraid, but to come away aware and to drive awareness. Being afraid just leads to panic and doesn't lead to anything good, but being aware leads to potentially productive steps that you can take to make these types of things not happen. And I think that's what's most important.
Great. Okay, well, let's give our panel a hand.